Hey, just letting you all know, I keep saying episode 26 in this episode, but I mean 27, so sorry about that. What's up, guys? It's KhUnlimited. Welcome to episode 26 of Spill the Tearal, my JRPG podcast where I talk about JRPG news, what I'm playing, what I want to play, release dates, and more. Like I believe last week, this is another special episode, and next week will also be a special episode because, as I mentioned, I'm in the middle of the move. If you're watching the video version, you might notice that this is different from how it usually looks. I am sitting on the ground and I made a mini setup with my laptop. I brought my audio interface and everything down here because my PC is currently on the ground disassembled because I am in the middle of packing that. And so I can't use my usual setup. And so if it looks shittier than usual, which it probably does, because if you could see my room, it's just fucking like 80 boxes around me. And so I just made this temporary setup just to record the episode you're listening to now. And also next week's episode, which is also going to be a special episode. I want to try to do something different from the tier list. Those are fun to do, but I also don't want special episodes just to be that, because the point of the special episode is to do something that's different from the usual. And so this is going to be more of a discussion-based one. And I thought it would be fun for this episode to talk about JRPG battle systems. So I'm just going to be talking about like every JRPG battle system that I can think of. I'll talk about my favorites, maybe some that I don't like, etc. And that's what it's going to be. The reason I'm doing this as a topic is because I want to think of something that doesn't take as much pre-prep time. I don't know if it comes out in the actual podcast, but like the normal podcast episodes do take a lot of prep time in terms of finding the news, reading up all of them, the release dates, reading up on those games, etc. That takes a few hours. And so for the special episode, ideally I want something that doesn't take that much prep time, so I can, record, a bunch of them quickly. So I'm going to be recording 2 right now. And so for episode 26, we're going to be talking about JRPG battle systems. And I think we can get started right away. And again, just before starting, if this sounds worse than usual, sorry, I'm using the same mic, same interface, but I'm in a different position. I'm using a different computer to record it. And so the settings are kind of different, as I noticed, like the audio waves don't look the same. So I'll see in editing if I can make it sound the same, but yeah, that's how it is right now. So yeah, let's just get right into the topic now. So JRPG battle systems. Now, when I think about the battle systems that are in JRPGs, I don't know if everyone does this, but I think about it in 2 huge buckets. One is turn-based and one is real-time. And I guess before going into any of them, there is technically a middle bucket, or like the center of the Venn diagram, that is another battle system, which I personally do not like, which is, I don't know if there's an official name. I think people may just call it is it the ATB system? It's pretty much what Final Fantasy VII uses, which is like a mix of turn-based and real-time, I believe, where technically it's using the UI of a turn-based system where you have to go through the menus, but it's also real-time because if you just don't do anything, the enemies will continue to attack you. And at least for me personally, I think that's like the worst battle system in terms of it takes the worst aspects of both, really, because for me, the pros of the turn-based battle system is that you get to take your time, strategize, and really, finally pick what you want to do and think about every action you make in a turn-based battle system. That's kind of like the beauty of the battle system. You're not rushed to do what you need to do, you just do it. And the pros and the beauty of a real-time battle system is that you're in full control of your character. Everything's real-time. You get to move wherever you want. It's very smooth and seamless, hopefully, if the game is made good, and you're just in full control of your character. So I think those are the best aspects of both the battle systems. But then you have something like the ATB system, which is an in-between, where like you have the turn-based UI, but for some reason you're rushed to make those choices. So you're pretty much taking the worst aspects of the turn-based battle system, which is the UI technically, because the beauty is being able to take your time. So right now you're not able to take your time, so that's already bad. And also, you don't really have the freedom to move that you usually do in a real-time battle system. So like really, the ATB, I'm gonna keep calling the ATB system. But I'm talking about generally any game that does like the system where you're able to do turn-based mechanics in a real-time setting. It's just really the cons of both systems. You're just rushed to use a turn-based system, and I always think it just doesn't play as well. So that's one of the reasons I actually wasn't playing the original FF7. I am going to play at some point once I'm done with the remake series because I'm really into the series now. But I believe Chrono Trigger I think was the same system. And I played a decent amount of Chrono Trigger, but at some point I just stopped playing because I'm like, this battle system just sucks. I don't like it. I think it was Chrono Trigger. It was a game of that era, but like I just wasn't enjoying it at all. So that's how I feel about it now. Maybe in the future I'll like it more, but I always felt like it was weird because I also think I played Final Fantasy IV recently. And I can't remember if that was it too. I think that might have been also like a mix, turn-based and real-time system. But what I was okay with that game is they gave you enough upgrades where you can pretty much do like 4 times XP, 4 times money, and that kind of balanced the shittiness of it out. So I was okay with it. But in general, I just want to get that battle system out of the way because there's a battle system I personally do not enjoy that much, but it is something I know people enjoy because obviously it's part of the legendary game Final Fantasy VII. Is just something that I don't really like that much. But yeah, that is real time and turn based. Now let's move on to the big two. Now in terms of real time, you do have like a lot of variance, obviously. And the way I like thinking about it in my head is almost a scale of like full freedom. You're almost like godlike. You get to do whatever you want. And the other end of the scale is like you don't have as much freedom. It's kind of more strict and the world is like very harsh. And that's kind of the scale I see. And obviously what you like on the scale is up to your preference. I definitely prefer this side of the scale, the extreme, where like you get to do whatever you want. It's fully based on like how you fight. It's very quick, it's seamless, you flow. And at some point in the game, you're pretty much a god in the game where you get to just like freely fight, and those are the games I gravitate to. I would say some examples are Final Fantasy 16. That's a game where like once you do get a lot of the icons' powers, you just feel like a fucking god. You just get to continuously chain all your attacks, and you can get to a rhythm where you're just fucking annihilating every single person you fight, and you truly do feel like a god. I would even say like Kingdom Hearts games, like Kingdom Hearts 2, like if you know how to play properly and like flow and get in the flow of combat and the combos, you do feel like, you know, like just this flow of water almost going through it. A more recent game that I felt that was very similar to Kingdom Hearts is called Phantasy Star Online 2 Genesis. And it's weird because it's an MMO, and I played it with my brother for like a decent amount of time. But we were both surprised that when we started playing the game, like it felt very free and flowing and felt a lot like Kingdom Hearts 2. I think like my brother, who like really loves Kingdom Hearts 2 and 3 combat, he said like, yeah, this is like the only other game he's ever played that like feels very similar to the Kingdom Hearts games, where like the combat just feels like you're very much in control. And so yeah, that's like one end of the combat where you feel like you have a lot of control. And since that is my preference, obviously the farther you get away from it on like this hypothetical scale, the less I like the combat system. I know that's not true for everyone, but I would say the other extreme is obviously like more like Souls-like games. I think Souls-like games, from what I've played, is it's a lot more harsher. The world is like more against you, and because of that, they purposely make you feel more not in control. Like you really have to know what you're doing. You move slower usually. You have to be more careful with how you fight. It's not like you're just fucking moving around like a god. You gotta be very careful, dodge a lot, block a lot, and because of that, it's again less flowing, but at the same time, it does force you to be more strategic. And I talked about this in plenty of episodes in the past, and I have a video dedicated to it where I talk about how like I personally do not enjoy this type of combat, because when I'm in a game, I just want to feel more like godlike and be fast and powerful. And I feel like Dark Souls or like the Souls genre really make you feel like tiny in the world and like always like on edge, and you really have to be careful of what you do, which I personally don't like. But I know obviously Elden Ring, Souls games are like one of the most popular series in the game, so I can see why people do like it. But I would say that's on the other end of the spectrum where you have to be very careful with your decisions, and overall it is a more slow process when you're fighting compared to the other side, where like you can usually finish battles very fast. You can sometimes, and I think one of the reasons why I even like the free flow combat style more is at times when I'm playing a game, I don't always want to be in the mindset of being very careful and strategic. Sometimes I do want to turn my brain off and just fucking button mash and get through a battle. And those games kind of allow you to do that sometimes. So like if you're fighting easier battles in those type of games, you can kind of just button mash and get through it. But when you're fighting a harder battle, you kind of have to lock in and really know what you're doing. Whereas on the other hand, when you're playing a Souls-like game, you kind of have to be in the headspace of being strategic all the time. There isn't usually that many quote unquote easy battles. You do have to lock in pretty much for every battle, or at least you got to know what you're doing, where like you can't ever really, at least for me because I suck at games, you can't ever really turn your brain off and just go through the game. And so I think that's why I gravitate more towards the easy type, flowy type games too, because sometimes, yeah, if I'm like playing like at 2 a.m. and I'm very tired after working, I'm like, let me just fucking grind through these battles. And I think another great example is the East games too, where they're also real-time combat systems, but they're very simple. There's not really combos like from the ones I played, at least like East 8, East 9, East 7, like those games. It is pretty button mashy, and the most strategy really you have to use is switching characters based on which character has advantage on what enemy, and that's all. And that's a game like, if you really want to, if you're strong enough, you don't even have to switch characters. You can just button mash and get through. And that's fine for me because, again, I play games for story, and that's just the type I gravitate towards too. And so when it comes to real-time battle systems, that is my preference. And obviously there's games in between too. I played a bunch of games in between. I'm trying to think of one right now. Right, a recent one that I remembered is Star Ocean: The Divine Force, which is a game I talked about on an earlier episode, where it is real time, and at times it does feel free flowy-ish because you can, I believe, like move around quickly and get around enemies, but the battle system is so like complicated compared to a normal JRPG, where it does start to feel a bit more Souls-like, where you kind of do always have to be locked in and really understand their battle system pretty well and form strategies around every single battle. And they have a lot of like meters, and you gotta pay attention to that. And because of like all those systems they have in place, it does start to feel like it's kind of in the middle, where it does feel free flowy at some points, but at the same time it feels more Souls-like, where you gotta really lock in and pay attention to all your meters and systems to be able to get through all the battles. And that's one of the reasons I dropped it, because the battle system was just a bit too clunky for me to get through. And at some point I feel like their difficulty curve just wasn't set right, and so that's why I ended up dropping the game. But I would say that's a good example, Star Ocean: The Divine Force, which is probably somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. But I think that's pretty much it for the real-time combat system segment. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention. If there is, I'll just mention later. But from here, let's move on to the turn-based combat system. Now, the turn-based combat system is more my speed. This is something, as I kind of grew older, is a type of battle system which I grew to like more and more. And at this point, if I had to like vanish one type of battle system, I would let real-time combat just like fade away. And because I just prefer turn-based battle systems, I think the reason why I ended up preferring it more is like when I was going through university, I had a lot less time to play games, and so pretty much what my schedule would be was I'd go to school, I'd come back home, do my homework and assignments, and it was like midnight by the time I was done, and then I would game from like midnight to 3 a.m. or something like that. And when you're like gaming that late after like a full days of work, you're dead tired, my brain is barely functioning. And when I was like at that point, I just couldn't play real-time combat games anymore. I think I specifically remember one game, which was a Scarlet Nexus, which is a game I was really loving. I love the story, I love the style, and the combat was a real-time combat game, and it was very fun. But I started noticing that I just wasn't able to play it anymore, because when I was in university, I wasn't able to play every day. It would be like I'd play a day, then I'd come back 3 days later. Sometimes I'd come back 2 weeks later. Sometimes I'd come back like a month and a half later. And with that game, every time I came back, I was just like slower and slower. And I have to remember all the different systems they have in the game. Is like you could kind of partner up with your teammates. You could do these moves. You can do this different type of move. You can transform. And being able to keep all that in your head and having to remember all that in real time was getting harder and harder. And I think the breaking point for me was I came back to the game. I think it had been like a month or two since I played, and when I came back, I was pretty much right before a boss battle, so I couldn't do anything but fight that boss battle. And so I had to acclimate with the game again, remember all those systems and learn it while fighting this super hard boss. And when I got to the point, I was like, okay, I think I'm done. I don't know if I can keep like going through this loop of reacclimating, because it just gets tiring at some point, where like every time I think about playing the game again, I'd be like, I want to play the game, I want to experience the story, but I don't know if I want to relearn the controls and systems every single time. And so that's when I ended up dropping Scarlet Nexus, even though I was straight up loving the game. And so this brings me to the point of turn-based combat systems, where like all that acclimation I was talking about, there's usually none of that. I think in general, I noticed turn-based systems are just simpler. Like as in like, even if you do come to a game like 3 months later, there isn't really that much to learn again. It's very usually just the same. Like you have your attack, you have your item, you have your magic, run, etc. And you have like different versions of that in different games. But pretty often it is usually that base system, and if there is any differences, it's very minor. And so like no matter what turn-based system you're playing, if you come back even like 6 months later, you'll get acclimated like within 5 minutes. And the best part is, because it is a turn-based system, there's no rush for you to learn it again. It's just like you could just go into a random battle and you can literally take as much time as you need to look at the UI, learn it, and you're good. Where with a real-time battle system, I had to fucking, like, if I was in a boss battle like I was with Scarlet Nexus, I would have to on the fly learn everything or risk losing. And every time I lose on a boss, I just gotta get discouraged to play the game. And so that's why I kind of slowly started shifting to turn-based games. Now, when it comes to turn-based games, like real-time games, there are like a lot of different versions. I don't know if I'd say there's like a clean spectrum like the one I laid out in real time, but I did notice there are a lot of different versions. I think the first one I want to talk about, which I think is probably the simplest version of a turn-based game that I've played, and I think is probably the first one I played, which is Pokemon, which is, you know, I feel like everyone knows what the Pokemon battle system is. If you don't, It's just two Pokemon on the field. You have attack, you can do a couple of moves. You have item, you can use items. You can run. And I think that's it. I'm not sure if there's anything. Oh, you could switch Pokemon, I guess. And I would say that's like the most basic battle system I've used, because especially these days, if there's a turn-based system, you at least have, in addition to that, like some kind of magic feature or like an MP system. But Pokemon doesn't even have that. Pokemon just has attack, and you have like 4 moves you can use, and that is it. And I'd say that's the most basic battle system. And funnily enough, Pokemon is a reason I realized that I probably do look like turn-based systems. So when I was kind of in that phase of like switching from real-time to turn-based, I was like, am I gonna like turn-based? I'm not sure if I would. They're usually slow, they're kind of boring, etc., etc. But then I remembered, like, wait, I grew up on Pokemon. Pokemon is technically turn-based, so like, I fucking love that, so why wouldn't I like other turn-based games? And that was kind of like the impetus for me to try more turn-based games. And so I would say Pokemon is like, if there was like a spectrum, probably on one end of being the simplest one. I'm not sure if there are simpler ones. Maybe there are, like maybe on mobile or something. But it is like probably the perfect battle system to like start with if you're like a kid or something, or if you have like a niece or a nephew, just like, hey, play this, and like let them learn turn-based based off that, because it is very simple. It works very well. And I think one of the things that makes it very simple, other than like not having a magic system, is there's absolutely zero movement of any kind, where like you not only can you not move your character, but there's no real targeting too. I know this probably changes like in newer Pokemon games, but like at the time when I was playing the early games, it's you fighting one enemy, and you're fighting that one enemy only. So whatever attack you do is only on that enemy. Whereas some turn-based battle systems, they at least let you choose which enemy you want to fight, because you get to fight multiple enemies. And Pokemon wasn't really like that, at least in the early days. And so I think with the fact that there's absolutely no movement or targeting, and there's no magic system, Pokemon is just a very simple example of a turn-based battle system. And from there, you can kind of get more and more complex. Like I mentioned, you can have something like Pokemon, but you can have magic on top of that. You can have targeting on top of that. You can even have movement on top of that. But I also want to go to another extreme of the turn-based battle system, which I want to say is the grid-based battle system, or I believe they're called like strategy RPG, something like that, where everything is done on a grid. Now, I tried this battle system. I tried it with a game called Utaware Rumono, I believe it was called. And I believe this is the battle system used in things like Disgaea, I believe, maybe even Fire Emblem. And also, I believe Project Triangle Strategy, is that what it was called? Like the game that was made by the Octopath guys. I believe it was grid-based in that too. And I started to slowly realize I do not like that battle system. I thought I would, because I like turn-based battle systems, but it started feeling way too strict for me, where like, I just did not like that this attack would be able to do 2 blocks of range, this one is 1 block of range, and blah blah blah. When you kind of put all those together, the battle system was just feeling strict to the point where it wasn't fun anymore. So for example, I'd be fighting a bad guy, and like if these 3 bad guys were like surrounding me in a certain way, I just wouldn't be able to fight a bad guy that was diagonal away from me, even though he's literally right there. Like I should be able to fucking physically reach that bad guy with my sword. The game just wouldn't let me, because this move for some reason only works 1 block straight instead of 1 block diagonal. And so little things like that building up and up together just made me lose interest in that battle system. And also, what I realized with the games that use this battle system, at least one that I played, is the battles are just like way too fucking long for me. I'm talking about like absurdly long. Like I would even like classify if a battle takes like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, that's already like very long. Like that's like hella long, because like if you lose that, you just lost the 15 or 20 minutes. But I was doing a battle in Utaware Rumono, and that game is also very forgiving, where like I believe at any point in the battle they let you travel back in time to any point in the battle. So like if you fuck up and make a wrong move, you can reverse to like before that if you really want to. I believe it was something like that. But I was doing a battle which when I finished, I think it was like an hour or 2 later or something like that. It was something absurd, where the battle like took really fucking long. And when I beat it, I was like, finally, that was really fucking boring. I don't want to do that again. And I was hoping that after that battle, the game would just like let me like chill for a while, because the battles were usually not that long. They would usually be like 10 minutes or something. And after the battle, I assumed that we would go back to the village. There'd be a lot of story and blah, blah, blah. But literally, I kid you not, like what happened is I beat that battle. There was a scene, and I believe one guy said like, oh, more of them are coming. And then went to another battle right away. And I'm like, what the fuck? And so like I stopped playing the game then. I'm like, this is too much. I'm not enjoying the battle system of being grid-based. And on top of that, I noticed that like the grid-based battles are just like way too long for me. And so that's how I kind of realized that grid-based battle systems are not for me, even though they are turn-based. And so I think when you kind of look at all that, what I enjoy the most is something in between. So you have the Pokemon battle system, which is turn-based, but it's very simple. There's no movement or targeting or anything like that. But you have the grid-based battle system where there's a lot of movement. Movement matters a lot. Where you are on the field kind of dictates what you can do. And that I feel like is too much. And so I kind of gravitate somewhere in the middle. And the game that has that is the Trails games. And I love the Trails games. I talk about this in pretty much every episode. But the Trails battle system pretty much is a turn-based battle system. There's movement, but there's no real grid, which is what I like. So the way that attacks work is you're pretty much on a field and everything is turn-based, but you get to move your characters around, but all the attacks are based on like a certain area. So for example, you may have an AoE attack and it'll just draw a circle on the field, and as long as the enemies are in that circle, they'll be in it. And there's no grid. That's kind of the beauty of it. Like when you're moving the circle around, it's like pixel by pixel. There's no actual grid. And so what that allows, which is funny, is that you get to kind of finagle what enemies are in the circle. So if you could somehow fucking move that circle perfectly in a certain way where like all the enemies are in it, all of them will take damage, which I like. Where like with the grid-based system, no matter what you do, you cannot finagle anything. It's like you have very specific rules of how much blocks you can attack, and if an enemy is not in the block, you cannot do anything about it. With the trail system, if you can try to finagle the enemies in your area of effect attack, they will get hit. So there's these circular attacks. You have attacks which are line attacks, which pretty much make a line. And you get to move them, and it's not on a grid. It's like any single degree you want to attack, you attack all the way as far as you can. That attacks our enemies. You have the basic attacks where you just straight up just run up to them and attack with them. And what I kind of like about the battle system is because there's no grid base, there's just no real restrictions. What I talked about in the grid-based battle system, for example, is if there are enemies, for example, standing a certain way and they're surrounded by certain characters, sometimes I wouldn't be able to attack the enemy because there's physically no space for me to reach them because they're just surrounded by different characters. Where with Trails, that doesn't really ever happen because there's no actual grid. No matter what, if I want to attack someone, my guy will run up to them in some way with their auto path tracing and I'll be able to attack them, which is nice. Like, it's kind of annoying when you want to attack an enemy and you just can't just because of the way the players are laid out in the game. So that's kind of like another thing that I like about it. And on top of that, on top of the movement and like the non-strict grid-based system that Trails has, I just think their actual like the stuff you can do during battle is just very fun. So you have your basic attack, which you get to attack. On top of that is a different weapon. So you have like guns, swords, staves, lances, whatever the fuck. They have a bunch of type of weapons. You have your arts system, which in Trails is pretty much a magic system. So you have like an arts meter, you get to use magic, and those are element based like water, fire, space, time, etc. And then finally you have the, I believe it's called combat arts, which is pretty much your physical abilities system, which like you can do like stab attacks or fucking grenades or things like that. Pretty much physical attacks that you want to use are used through the system, and that has its own meter too. And so with the combat abilities plus the arts plus the normal attacks, and obviously you have your items and all that, I just think it's a very robust system. And with the non-strict grid, it just makes it personally my favorite system in any game. And it's also very cool to see it evolve throughout the games. Where Trails in the Sky, funnily enough, I played it again, I believe last year, and I forgot that I think is actually a grid-based system. So like it's actually more of a game I don't like, but again, it's like not too strict, so it was still fun to play. But then when you get to Trails of Cold Steel, it is the completely non-strict grid system where there is no grid, and you kind of see them add more stuff as you go along. So I believe in like the farther Trails of Cold Steel games, they have things like battle orders and they have like ultimates and shit like that, and they play with new mechanics and take them away all the time, so which is cool. But unfortunately, I think this is already happening in Japan, but I believe they announced that the future Trails games are not going to be turn-based anymore. They're going to be real-time because they want to kind of move with the industry or something. I can't remember the exact wording, but they said like they noticed that the trend of games is going to real-time, so they kind of want to match that trend and move away from turn-based, which sucks. It is what it is. I'm cool with accepting it, especially because they did have a real-time game, the developers of Trails, which is the Tokyo Xanadu games, and I actually really like that real-time system. It was very simple. It was very easy, which I liked, but we'll see how it is in Trails. And again, I'm not sure if it's already out in Japan or not, but I'm very curious to see how the real-time system would be in Trails. But I believe that's all I have to say about this topic. We talked about real-time systems, we talked about turn-based systems, we talked about in between, what I like, what I don't like. In real-time, I prefer more free, flowy, fast combat. In turn-based, I prefer combat that has movement, but it is not kind of stuck to a grid. And I like when you can do a lot of stuff like attack and magic and combat abilities and things like that. And I just don't like the middle where you get to have like these pseudo real-time / turn-based systems. But again, these are my preferences. I like that there's so many different battle systems that everyone can have their own preferences. If you have a specific preference, let me know down in the comments. I'd be, excited to read it. One of the very cool things about one of the videos I made, which was a game where I kind of talked about Lords of the Fallen, but the video was pretty much me talking about how I don't really like these Souls games and their combat style. And I got like a bunch of essays in the comments, like in a good way, where like people were saying like, hey, I can see why you don't like it, but I like it because of X, Y, and Z. And it really opened my eyes to like why people really like it. And there were a lot of hate comments, but there were a lot of comments that kind of told me nicely like how the Souls games like work and like why they think it's good. And it did open my eyes and make me really want to try some Souls games again in the future when I do have time. But I'm bringing that up because if you do have different opinions from me or the same opinions, let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to read it. I read all my comments, and it'd be really fun to see how our opinions differ. And so thank you guys for watching this. If you're listening to this episode on audio services, remember to give it 5 stars. I appreciate it. I tweet from Spill the Tearal. It is a Twitter account, so you can follow me there if you want. If you're watching on YouTube on Spill the Tearal or KhUnlimited, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next week for episode 27. Peace.